Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Chicken Marbella. That's right, I'm going to show you my version of the Silver Palate's famous Chicken Marbella, which was named that because they couldn't call it chicken with olives and prunes, since nobody's ordering that. But despite that possibly weird-sounding combination of ingredients, this is without a doubt one of the top 5 most delicious chicken recipes ever. Maybe top 3. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our chicken. And for this, I like to use 12 of the largest bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs I can find. And whenever we work with these, I think we should find the thigh bone, which runs this way. And once we identify that, we'll flip it over and make 2 cuts perpendicular to the bone, right through the skin like this, about 1.5 inches apart. And that will allow our marinade to get in a little deeper and a little quicker. And I also think it makes for a little more interesting appearance. So we'll go ahead and do that to all 12. Oh, and I should mention, the original recipe is done by cutting up whole chickens, pretty much like we would do if we were making fried chicken. But for me, the thighs are the most user-friendly choice. And we don't have to worry about the white meat drying out while we're waiting for the dark meat to cook through. But anyway, once our chicken's prepped, we can move on to this very simple but incredibly delicious marinade, which starts with a whole bunch of crushed garlic, plus an equally generous amount of dried oregano, followed by some freshly ground black pepper, and then of course some kosher salt, with the rule of thumb being 1 teaspoon per pound of meat. And then we'll also do a few shakes of cayenne, even though that's not in the original recipe, right? They probably just forgot it. And then we will also add a little bit of caper brine, which is the liquid the capers are packed in. And you will see the actual capers in a minute, but for now we'll just add the juice. And that's it. We'll finish up with some red wine vinegar, as well as some nice olive oil. And then we'll grab a whisk and give this a quick mix before we head over to whatever container we're going to marinate our chicken in, which in a perfect world is something large enough to fit all the thighs in one single layer. And then besides the chicken and the marinade, we will also need some halved green olives, some chopped up prunes, which I'll talk about in a second, and some capers. And what we'll do is take half of each of those things, and we'll scatter those over the bottom of this container. And yes, you'll definitely want to buy the pitted olives for this. And then regarding the prunes, which I like to chop up pretty small, I'm not sure how many people realize those are actually dried plums, but some genius a long time ago decided not to call them dried plums, since I guess that sounded too delicious, and they named them prunes instead, which does not sound as good. But anyway, we'll toss half of those 3 things in the bottom, and then we will place in our chicken, skin side down. And once those have been placed in, we'll give our marinade a quick stir, and then apply a nice generous spoonful to the top of each thigh. And I will admit, this step may or may not be necessary. Right? We probably could just dump over all the marinade, and it would probably come out very close. But this just feels right, so I do it. Okay, it's part of the ritual of cooking that you always hear me talking about. And then what we'll do is go ahead and flip these over, and then once we have all those thighs turned with the skin side up, we can take the rest of our olives and prunes, dried plums, and capers, and we can scatter the rest over the top. And then eventually we will top everything with the rest of the marinade. And by the way, if you don't have a container like this, where everything fits perfectly, you can just use a roasting pan, or one of those large foil pans used for your turkeys. Or even if you want a large bowl, or a plastic bag. Okay, as long as the meat's surrounded by all this goodness, we're going to be fine. But if you do have something like this, I think it's an advantage, since we know everything's going to be evenly and properly marinated. But anyway, like I said, once all that's been applied to the top, we'll go ahead and spoon over the rest of the marinade. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's supposed to be a few bay leaves tossed in here, which I decided not to add, because I forgot to write it down when I transposed the recipe. So I will add a note to the written recipe if you want to add those. And then before we cover this, if you have it, I like to place a piece of parchment paper over the top and give that a nice firm pressing down. But this is optional and you don't have to do it, but I like to. Again, it just looks and feels right. And then what we'll want to do is cover this and then pop that in the fridge to marinate for 24 hours. Okay, just overnight is fine, but if you can go the full 24 hours, I think it's even better. And that's it. The next day we will pull it out and unwrap it, and we will place that skin side up in a nice large roasting pan. And then once that pan's been thawed, we'll go ahead and take any of the remaining olives, capers, and dried plums, and we will scatter those evenly over the top, along with any of the excess marinade. And as we get to the end of that task, we will want to sort of clear off the top of the thigh, and you'll see why in a second as we transfer on the last ingredient. But first we need to add the second to last ingredient, which would be pouring over 1 cup of white wine. Or if you don't do wine, you could do some chicken broth with a splash of vinegar in it. So if you want to do that instead, feel free. I mean, you are, after all, the playa of your Chicken Marbella, but the wine is highly recommended if you can use it. And then to finish this up, believe it or not, we're going to sprinkle the tops with some brown sugar. I know you didn't see that coming. Nobody does. And in the original recipe, we would sprinkle all of it on top now, but I'm just going to use about half the amount at this point, and then we will add the rest after we baste. But first things first. So once our chicken's been brown sugared as shown, it is ready to transfer into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 1 hour and 15 minutes to 1 hour and a half total. But after about 40 to 45 minutes, we should probably pull it out and give it a basting, just to kind of moisten the tops and take a look at everything. Plus, it's a proven scientific fact that basting is therapeutic. Oh yeah, if you have a lot of stress, you should try this. And then what we'll do after a little bit of basting is finish the sugaring. And in case you're keeping score at home, I'm definitely using less brown sugar than the original recipe, since I think there's plenty of sweetness coming from those dried plums. But anyway, once that's been accomplished, we will pop it back in the oven until it's cooked to our liking, which for me is the meat being fork tender, but not falling off the bone. And for an optional step, once we think our chicken's almost cooked, we can crank the heat up to like 425 for the last 15 minutes or so, just to get some extra browning on the top. And once we're done, if everything goes according to plan, our chicken should look like this. And then you don't have to, but I'm going to give these one more baste, so the tops are nice and shiny for the pictures. And then for a final touch, this is traditionally sprinkled with chopped parsley. And that's it, our Chicken Marbella, or as many of you will insist on calling it, Chicken Marbella, is ready to enjoy. And we really should let this cool down a little bit before trying to eat it, but I was starving and could not wait. So even though it was too hot, and I knew it was going to be hard to cut in the pan, I went in for a taste anyway. And that, my friends, as I mentioned in the intro, is one of the most delicious chicken dishes of all time. And many claim the most delicious chicken dish of all time. So I took a couple quick bites before plating some up properly. And by properly, for me, I mean on some mashed potatoes. Although this really is fantastic on so many things, including rice and pasta. And we will definitely want to spoon over plenty of those olives and dried plums, along with copious amounts of the cooking liquids, which we could thicken up if we wanted to bother, but we don't. Just spoon it over like this and start eating. And what makes this so incredibly enjoyable to eat is that it has everything. Okay, it has the perfect balance of sweetness and tanginess and brininess and saltiness. And all that is perfectly balanced by the acidity from the wine and the vinegar, which really cuts through the richness and that sweetness from the fruit. So to summarize, I loved everything about this. And you might be thinking, if this is so incredible and one of the greatest chicken dishes of all time, why have I never heard of it? Well, I think it's because this originated in New York City in the late 70s at the Silver Palate. And while it was a viral sensation there, it was much harder for a dish like this to gain popularity in other parts of the country. Mostly because this was before the internet. And you actually had to talk to other people, or read about it in a magazine or newspaper. So news about a dish like this really didn't travel that fast. But anyway, now we do have the internet, and people like me showing you how to make it. So now there is no excuse for you not to know about and make and enjoy this dish on a regular basis. And I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.